Hello to our worldwide viewership. It's James Kalm, your half-assed reporter, taking incompetence to new heights. And we're gonna run in here to stacked galleries, specifically to the Natali Karg Gallery, and we're gonna begin a series of visits to look at works by Al Held. Stay tuned. We are here at the Natali Karg Gallery on Grand Street, and we're going to make a quick run-through of Al Held in Paris, 1952 to 53. And we're going to look at some of the breakthrough paintings that Held produced while he was studying over there for 2 years, in the early 50s. This is Untitled, oil on canvas, 22 by 14, 1952 to 53. Untitled. Well, I was pedaling down Orchard Street and I happened to bump into a fairly well-known painter. His name is Gary Peterson, and we were comparing notes, and I asked him what was interesting. He says, geez, have you seen the Al Held show at the Natali Karg Gallery? And I said, no. He said, well, get over and see the show. So I popped in and, well, I thought it was interesting. So this is Untitled, 1952-53, 18 by 24. I was looking at this, and I've been doing some research recently on a piece that I'm working on dealing with post-World War II avant-garde movements in Europe. And, well, one of the things I was immediately struck with was how this work relates to a group of painters working in Europe that have been kind of called the material painters, and I guess that would be a subcategory of the art informal. And art informal doesn't mean informal, it means without form. This is Untitled, 72 by 46. Well, as you know, I'm kind of a fan of chunky paint, and getting back to the material painters, that would be including people like Nicolas de Stagia, Frautreur, French painter, and Dubuffet as well. I think that also there were aspects of what some of the other artist groups like Cobra were doing, and some of the German artists as well, people like Hans Hartung and Solange. I'll read a little bit from the press release. The Paris paintings at Natali Karg Gallery are richly dark works with ripples of white, blue, green, and red running horizontally across their heavily worked surfaces. One exception, which I believe is this one, a mosaic-like patchwork of earth tones, dark greens and reds from 1953, provides a bridge to Held's approach after he returned to New York, as the debut works of a major American artist, Held's sensuous, mysterious, and dynamic Parisian nocturnes are emblematic of the restlessness and audacity that would become hallmarks of his career. Well, I think I read somewhere else in the press release that he was doing a lot of experimenting with mixing wax and ground glass and various things into his pigments. And it's interesting to watch the arc of Held's career and some of the work like this that were part of his initial breakthrough, and then from here transitioning into his, what he calls his pigment paintings, and from there on to his alphabet paintings, and to finally his huge black and white geometric forms that really put him on the front page of all the art magazines. Untitled, 1952-53. And maybe 2 weeks ago, we were just around the corner at the Miguel Abreu Gallery, and we were looking at some paintings by Milton Resnick, who was another person that I would consider part of the, or at least carrying on certain aesthetic aspects of the material paintings. You know, someone who was very committed to paint, oil paint, texture, and the material quality of paint. This actually makes me think of a Fautrera figure, maybe, Untitled. This is 23 by 28. Untitled, Oil on Board. Also in the press release, they talk about Held wanting to somehow use the kind of dynamic gesture of Pollock, but do that with more pigment. So somehow this kind of makes me think of, I think there was an early Pollock picture of a fire. Kind of makes me think of. We'll conclude our stroll looking at this piece. Untitled, 57 by 42. Well, there was a show down at the Phillips Museum in Washington, D.C. about 5 years ago, and they were talking about George Braque and some of the various things that Braque was mixing in his paint back in the late teens, early 20s. And they actually had gathered together a whole group of European artists that they felt had been influenced by what Braque was doing in his various concoctions. And, well, I think there's a wonderful, rich history of material painting, and this show is kind of an example of that. Al held in Paris, 1952 to 53. Natali Karg Gallery. We're making our way west now, headed towards Chelsea. Well, we made it to Chelsea, and we're gonna catch the second part of this Al held extravaganza here at CHEIM and Read. Okay, this part of the program is 1954 to 1959. We'll do our obligatory sweep of the installation. Well, our friends at the reception desk have informed me that we've got exactly 10 minutes, 9 minutes. Here's the last room. Well, I guess we'll run through this chronologically. Untitled, 28 by 18 inches. I'm going to paste this together with a panel discussion and the previous gallery tour at Natali Karg Gallery that featured the paintings from 1952 to 53. This is also entitled, this is 95.5 by 59. Well, this is going to be interesting because you really can see how Al held develops his style, kind of bumps up his palette. And kind of moves out of what I would consider kind of a material type of painting that was very popular when he was in France. This is Untitled, 1955, 16 by 24. Now, I am a big fan of painterly paintings, and I love the way that you can kind of read the age and the patina of these paintings from their surface. I came in and caught most of a panel discussion that was moderated by David Cohen and featured Matthew Israel, who wrote the catalog essay, and a couple of young female painters, Kelty Ferris, who you can go back and check. I think I covered a show of hers about a month ago. And another up-and-coming hot young painter, Natali Pravasti, who I also covered within the last month or two. This is Untitled. This is 60 by 78 inches. One of the reasons that I love this particular show is that these paintings are really pretty physical. I talked about how you could see the kind of the age, and this particular piece, I was looking at the puckering, and I think it's also interesting to look at the the way that Held was stretching his canvases and how he was actually piling on the paint, but a lot of these canvases are fairly lightweight, so there's a lot of interesting things that start to happen with these as they age. One of them is they start to, they belly out at the bottom. Untitled. This is 96 by 72. They were calling this group of works the pigment paintings, and one of the legends, myths, wonderful stories about this is that Al Held was working at the Museum of Modern Art, and at some point the museum was mixing or thinking about mixing their own colors for their walls, and for some reason they decided that that was impractical, and they decided to give the pigment to their employees. And Al Held grabbed a bunch of bags and took it home and started making his own paint. This is Untitled, 1955. One thing that did strike me when I came in for the panel discussion was the scale of these paintings. And I'd seen several of the pigment paintings before, but maybe the largest one I saw was, I don't know, 2.5 by 3.5 feet, something like that. And it's really quite a different experience when you see something like this. And I would have to say that Al Held was someone that really used the notion and the trope of scale, especially the New York school vision of scale in a very powerful way. And if you want to check the reports, and like I said, I'm going to try to link some of these together. Look at the alphabet paintings. He had pieces that were, they must have been 20 feet long, maybe more. By the way, I wanted to make a little shout out to the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. I had a young lady that came up to me and wanted to do a little selfie with me, and she said that her instructor there had a lot of kids watching the Kalm report. So good going, guys. If you see me on the streets, say hello. This is also Untitled. You can see where he has bumped up his color. This is from 1956. You can see that he's bumped up his color quite a bit. The early pieces, particularly the pieces at Karg Gallery, are mostly dark grays, blacks, Prussian blues. The early ones in this show kind of enter into the burnt sienna, yellow ochre, raw sienna. And this one, he's actually starting to get some nice cadmium yellow, some oranges. Here again, though, I want you to look at the pucker on this. Now I wonder whether that's just puckering from age or whether there was actually some slippage And his blues really pop. I was looking at these reds, this one right here, and it was making me think of a red balloon I had as a child that popped and landed on the ground. Okay, we're going to keep running. Now, I think that I've probably got about 40 or 50 minutes of the discussion, and I don't want to repeat a lot of what they were saying because a lot of it's very interesting, but I will make a few comments about the milieu that Al Held was working in at the time. Now, there was a whole group of American expatriate artists working in Paris at the time, not the least of which was Milton Resnick, another artist that they show here. This is Untitled, 1958. Ellsworth Kelly, Sam Francis, and there was a show at Steve Harvey that I covered. You can probably see it. I think it's a rough cut, maybe a month ago, and it was all about figurative painters that were either had spent time in Paris or were influenced by people from the school of Paris. Also, at this time in Paris, there was a great movement, and I think Jean Dubuffet would probably be the godfather of a lot of this. There was a movement towards a real material kind of painting, and there were also a group of Nordic artists there, the Cobra group, particularly somebody like Carl Appel and Angser Jorn, who were pretty adamant paint slingers. Okay, now, this is a great painting to give you an example of what I was talking about, of the physicality of the paint, and also the way that it kind of warps, changes, makes the painting belly out in various areas. I don't know if you can catch that. And like I said, because I'm a painter myself, I love to look at I guess what would be termed the non-aesthetic part of the paintings, but because I see these as objects, I would be inclined to include things like the stretchers and these weird supports that he's added as part of the piece. But you can see that the sag there. Now, as far as the people in America, in New York, that were getting attention at the time, this would be just after the arrival of the abstract expressionists. So Pollock, Klein, Rothko, Gottlieb, they would have already pretty much been recognized, but you would have the action painters, and a lot of people don't differentiate between the abstract expressionists and the action painters, but there is technically a little difference. This all goes back to Harold Rosenberg's essay of the American action painter, and how the action painters saw the canvas not as an area in which to create an image, but rather as an arena in which an event happened. And so people like de Kooning, Franz Klein, Joan Mitchell, and some other people, and I think Al Held would be one of them. Milton Resnick is kind of somewhere in the middle. This is a nice piece too. Okay, we're gonna go in the back room and we'll wrap up. Untitled, 1958, 72 by 108 inches. And with these two pieces, you can actually see that Held is going towards the group of paintings that he started in, I guess, the late 50s, maybe early 60s, his alphabet series. But you can look at this and start to see that the little forms that were, the strokes that were kind of stacked up like bricks in some of the earlier pieces are now being extended. And yeah, these big swaths of color, they're no longer just brush strokes or palette knife strokes. They're starting to become forms and shapes in their own right. And in the early 60s, this actually gets extended out into his alphabet series, and that would be, I guess, probably what people would call the color field school. And a lot of this has been designated by people like Clement Greenberg as the next step after painterly painting, or what he called the 10th Street School, or even kind of nastily called it the 10th Street Touch. Also, there was and I'm going to be linking a lot of pieces, other videos about Al Held together. There's a large painting, maybe it was a series of paintings, I think it's at the Met, that was his taxicab series. And you can sort of see that his use of the yellows and the blacks kind of are a harbinger of that series of paintings. Yeah, you can almost see, look at this this black arc over there that almost looks like a letter A. And he's opened his stroke up quite a bit. Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think that Al Held either sublet the studio from Sam Francis, or maybe Sam Francis sublet his studio. I think it was over on maybe 19th Street in Eastern Chelsea, around Broadway. So those guys all knew each other and were out slugging it out in the art world back in the late 50s, early 60s. I also was talking to one of the installers here, and he was saying that some of these paintings, they weigh from 100 up to 500 pounds. Now, I don't know what a painting like this would weigh, but I wouldn't be surprised if this would go 150, 175 pounds. It's a lot of paint. we're just going to wrap up looking at a couple of his ink on paper works, both untitled, from 1953. James Kalm, bringing you a Al-held marathon. I might have to split it up into two parts because it's going to be so long.
He arrived in Paris in 1951, and the Paris paintings that you can see in Natali Karg are 1952 to 1953. And a big takeaway from these paintings is that he had an artistic epiphany that would kind of fuel his art making for the rest of his life. And he decided at that moment that he would make abstract painting, but it would kind of move between the subjectivity of what he saw as the subjectivity of Jackson Pollock and the geometry of Pierre Mondrian. So to sort of think about this, Hell was an American painter living in Paris, thinking about Americans and Mondrian. You know, there are hints of European painters, but I think, you know, a lot of American painters has been, you know, well discussed, often discussed. We're really dealing with the kind of power and legacy of abstract expressionism, particularly Pollock and de Kooning at that moment, and figuring out, as a young painter, how do I actually make my own place there?
Yeah. But you know, the boundaries between, well, the boundaries, not boundaries, an ocean, but the gulf between Paris and New York is maybe not so cataclysmic when viewed through the lens of this gallery, because of China Reed's real interest in, well, obviously Joe Mitchell, who's an American in Paris, but also because of their real interest in fascism and in individuals like Serge Polyakov, who they've shown here, Fauché and others. So I'm wondering if it's just an American in Paris for a couple of years, and therefore let's not get hung up about it, or whether actually there is some real affinity at a certain level with paintings here.
Yeah.
And a European spin on ADX, which would be fascism, art, etc.
Yeah, and I mean, just
to add up to the whole panel.
Yeah, just to add a couple people in there, just for us all to kind of think about, you know, Soulange and Rio Pel, we were talking beforehand, you know, people to think and keep in mind in this orbit. But, you know, again, I think it's important to think about, you know, it's hard, especially because the narrative around this moment was so kind of Amerocentric, and I think there's definitely like more work to be done still to kind of call out these connections between Americans and Europeans at this moment, especially kind of in this funny period of the 1950s.
Yeah.
Also, Dori Ashton in her catalog essay, which at least a percentage of people in this room read probably from the last time these paintings were showed in 1990, said that in Paris, he hung out most of Americans. Elsewhere, Kelly was there, there was a group of others. But they mostly talked about, they made a list, Dubuffet, Hartung, Fautrier, Walls, and Stale. Like that's who they were talking about. But it is curious to think about if they even talked to the French. Maybe they didn't speak French, and so they didn't talk to them, because there's a lot of thick, sort of figurative, but thick, dense, existential-looking, muddy, sort of brown paintings.
Muddy, yes. I mean, it's a lot of the paintings here are actually, they're referred to as the pavement paintings. I believe the story that Matthew could tell us better, but I believe the story is that he'd been a custodian at MoMA, and there was a period when MoMA made their own paint to get the watercolors exactly right, and they ordered these big sacks of pigment, and then they changed their mind. So the paint was of the day, easier and cheaper and quicker. But, and so they let staff take the pigment away for free, sort of these sacks of pigment and mix them up, which is a great story because so much art is kind of either shrill in colour or rather sort of turgid and muddy in colour. And so the pigment paintings gave him this chance to create his own tones and his own hues. But maybe it's just a period thing, but they do seem a little. Should we read them as brightly coloured or as muddy? I mean, they kind of, in a weird way, both at the same time, aren't they?
I mean, I definitely took them as a study in ochres and earth tones, and I do know that from making my own paint, you tend to go down a rabbit hole with any one color or direction. And I don't know how much is dictated by need or happenstance, the fact that this was essentially found pigment.
Yeah. I mean, you can see in some of the painting, there's definitely, as you progress through the exhibition, there's paintings that are
Of course, yeah.
a lot more. And
And it goes more towards what the kind of color schemes that he's known for when you see that.
Right, exactly.
Also, in the Karg show, with the exception of the 3 latest pieces in that show, they're kind of black and white or deep kind of phthalo green. And also, all of those paintings, with the exception of the 3 latest ones, have a horizon and the top and the bottom echo. And so I was looking at them, I went over them this morning, and it looked to me like reflection. And so I wondered if his time in the Navy, he sort of carried over this nocturne, sort of nautical up and down thing. I mean, they all felt like water night scene reflections. With the exception of, scene is the wrong word because they don't like scenes. They were imagery-wise.
No, I mean, and just to kind of, I think we encourage all of you to go see that show. I think people, just to add on to that, because that's definitely something in terms of observation that's been seen. The light marks have been looked at as a kind of cross, and Held actually wrote about these light markings that are in the kind of center of the paintings as having some reference to the first lines of Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. And I'm not going to read that all to you, but maybe that could be your extra credit reading after the panel. But just in terms of the symbolism that was relevant for him.
It is quoted in Matthew's splendid catalogue essays, so no reason to get the catalogue. So, but the European strategy with art informel, the all-overness, not to reduce things simplistically to the Americans doing this, the Europeans doing that, but the patches of colour, a more kind of sculptural all-overness rather than perhaps a little more painterly in New York. That might perhaps have some bearings on time in Europe. I mean, after all, this is he would have exposure to all the galleries in Paris at the time, and an international. Sure, he's hanging with Americans, but the Grand Chemier is very much an international school with students from all over. So, of course, there's also in the 50s exposure of Americans perhaps, but so it's not as if there's kind of ignorance or literacy of each other's paintings. But there's a lot to my eye, these feel pretty European. And also just coming from England as well, and knowing English abstract painting in the 1950s with its more kind of lyrical and pastoral connotations. But
yeah, they have that sort of Cézanne-esque relationship from I don't know, structure to mark, to how things fit together. The marks fit together like a puzzle.
yeah.
And then I don't know, and we can go on about this I'm sure later, but know what it is about American painting and its resistance to the impossible in general. But in general, I think we're more prone to color and illusionism, even though, or flatness, but not paint as like.
Yeah.
Because like all these painters that we're referencing, when we begin we were deep into impossible.
Yes.
Are European.
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't know why.
When we think of impasto Arabex painters, it's isolated moments, the zip in the Newman, or the schemes in Pollock. Of course, there's the impasto de Coupe, which is,
Yeah, but it's, yeah. And even Dr. John's, with his wax has like sort of a little raised.
Seems like
Yes, sorry.
No, with yeah, I was thinking of what you're saying, the puzzles and the late Monet as a thought comparison, but the spirit of the work is so diametrically opposed because it's not about optics, it is about vision, but I think it has to do with a kind of vision of reality, a vision of seeing. And that's, I think, often in the earliest work is a kind of where do you place reality, which is a question that's distinct, then becomes distinct to a particular time.
Yeah. But he's a second, logically, he's a second generation. If he had carried on in a straightforwardly Arabex-y kind of way, he would have been a second generation abstract expressionist, and not to be like teleological about it, and I told you so, this is where history goes, but the American second generation post-paint goes into a saturated color, flat, optical place away from the haptic. And the hapticity of these is sort of an overwhelming sensation, isn't it?
What is it that's European about it? I'm curious, because I know what you mean.
Well,
Haptic.
that's my question to you. I mean, I'm just saying they feel and look very European to me. But I'm not going to say, oh, the Europeans have a monopoly on big chunks. But you mentioned Cézanne, and these are like very big, heavy, petit sensation.
Exactly, yeah.
So there is that building a picture through marks, which is in a way that the rhetoric of American abstract expressionism is to get away from it, to have the arena within which to act, the total vision of the field, etc.
This may be some oversimplistic, but I mean, I feel like American abstract painting Abex stayed very, for only a moment in mark making, and sort of like it's so much of French painting before and after the war deals with making pictures out of little marks.
Yeah.
Little marks building out, and Americans, I don't know, with our interest in signage and geometry, we go towards illusion and taut spaces that go out, and therefore not made out of them. And we like to see a mark. We like to see.
Carry on.
We like to see like the residual of the process, but we want to have something more like his later work, which is geometry and structure.
And a field.
Yes, a field and any connections, which I guess you always related to our signage, our love affair.
Yeah, that's.
This has no signage in it, and so much of this later work has so much American signage. And I mean, the actual sign and that.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to kind of locate everyone, because generally people know Al Held through the alphabet works, right? And so coming into a show like this might feel unfamiliar, but it's really, I think, the narrative of looking at these paintings, and then looking at the alphabet paintings, and also there was a series called the Taxi Cab paintings in the middle. You can really see kind of how he worked himself to get there, and as a really kind of process of a young painter sort of pushing themselves to kind of see where his mark can go, right? And you know, one thing, you know, I thought was interesting, and other people have commented on in the writing about these works, is that these paintings exist in a kind of funny moment in the history of American painting, you know, post-war painting, that they recall, you know, they're made in the sort of mid to late 50s. They recall Jasper Johns for people in terms of the kind of structuring of the abstract expressionist gesture. At the same time, and they also use gesture, which we were just talking about, and we usually associate gesture in this kind of narrative of American art with Pollock, right? But Pollock's gesture was a kind of performance gesture. It was a, you know, Alan Caprow seized on Pollock's painting process, and that was the root of happenings, right? So it was a performative process that made these works, and it was light, and it was kind of drips that had a, you know, we think about jazz and Pollock and this kind of movement and delicateness to his work, and these are about gesture, but they're very much not about delicateness. They're very heavy, and they're very loaded. Some of these paintings, the early ones, he was really struggling with the structural kind of integrity of these paintings, and experimented with all different ways in which to create depth. I mean, he talked about later in these paintings that he wanted, and this kind of even talks about, you know, foreshadows conceptual art, but there's a quote that I wanted to say was, in 1958, he talked about seeing his work as akin to sculpture, and he said, the space between the canvas and the spectator is real, emotionally, physically, and logically. It exists as an actual extension of the canvas surface. I would like to use it as such, and thus bridge the gulf that separates the painting from the viewer. And, you know, if I was teaching in our history class, I would ask my students generally, who does this remind you of? And it's Rauschenberg, right? So art, that chasm between art and life. And this is 58, around the same moment he's saying this. So it's a funny place. They're sort of gesture but not gesture, conceptual but not conceptual.
I hear where you're going with all this.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a compelling line of argument, but it's trying to yank these young paintings by someone who wants to be an adex painter.
Yeah.
And putting them with, you know, Dada, putting them with a kind of painting that's actually a kind of deconstruction of painting.
Yeah.
And these feel like they're not a deconstruction of painting. These feel like there's somebody striving to make a very integrated image, and that they actually feel that they have more in common, despite looking very different with the pictorial ambitions of someone like Joe Mitchell or Milton Resnick than they do with Jasper Johns or Robert Rauschenberg.
Yeah.
Would I disagree with that?
So I also thought of Rauschenberg when I was looking at these, and he was what, 3-4 years older than Helen, so basically the same age. And I thought, but when I look at Rauschenberg's work from that period, he looks like a classicist, and I think there's an incredible classical beauty to the way that they're composed, and I think what's shared is the kind of abject immediacy of the mark. What's different with these is the intensity of all over and the kind of compression inward that stretches out into longer marks on the outer edges, which eventually in the other room start to become shapes. But I think there's something similar in the kind of intensity of gesture, even though the desire is placed a little differently.
Yeah, and I don't mean to, I'm not trying to put him in a camp. I mean, this is not a sort of, you know, plea for held as a conceptual artist, but I think it's interesting just to understand at this moment all these other things going on, and you know, different, it's like a before moment for a lot of things, and you know, very much so, I would put him, you know, it's just this whole story of like second generation abstract expressionism is so funny, and they're so, I don't mean funny, humorous, but I think it's just it's a strange kind of lopping together of so many complicated painters that come out of that. You know, there's like Elfrid Kelly is a second generation abstract expressionist. I mean, there's so many different people that have that are in parts of these shows. Very much like the story of minimalism. A lot of artists initially labeled minimalists do not become minimalist per se, but it's part of the course there. But
Totally valid. Yeah, I go with that. And also, whatever John's and Rauschenberg's aspirations may be, and whatever their champions and eventual younger supporters may be what they're doing, in the moment of crafting an individual picture, it has its own chemistry, its own values, and we can yank them away from their intentions and put them on a plane with contemporaneous works like these. So it can work. It can work. Certainly.
Well, can I throw a question back
Please.
at you?
Oh, yeah.
So you mentioned contemporaneous works, and part of all these paintings were last shown as a kind of statement group in the late '80s, and it sort of argued connections between neo-expressionist artists. The first person that came to mind for me was someone like Julian Schnabel, and then now they're shown today, and I think there's ways in which they can. We're definitely very much in the middle, or hopefully it's still the beginning of a kind of renaissance of painting post-millennium or re-emergence, whatever you want to call it. I mean, just for all of you, I mean, do you see, are these works by a contemporary artist? I know it's a kind of ridiculous question, but, do you see these to be...
Contemporary artists or a 1980s artist? Or, there's three places we could be going, and I think they're all valid. But,
These are very rooted in their time and place to me, but especially their time. And
why, just out of curiosity, why is that?
The all-overness, the worship of the brushstroke, the colors, that to me comes so out of that time. Post-war, the darkness of the post-war period. These are so, I get a melancholy feel from them. I don't know if everyone else does, but something,
angsty feeling. Certainly.
yeah, angsty and melancholy, like compared to his later work, which is, to me, his work gets more and more vivacious and joyful and almost trippy.
Poppy.
There's a pop and there's a trip part. I personally believe that paintings are very tied to the moment they're making. They're timeless, but they're also almost, there's an I was here aspect to the whole endeavor, and it might as well be like I was here on May 29th, 2018. I could be painting today. So I don't know. I'm not sure how they could be.
Well,
I think I'm being too literal.
No, that's. I think it's good to get those bearings, and I'd love to hear Nat to answer the question as well. But one thing I would say is that, and this goes back, this tries to address the 1980s feeling that they have, that Matthew was suggesting they might have. That also goes back to the question of what makes them feel more European than American in a certain way, and that is that although they are abstract in the sense of they eschew a representational reading, they seem to assemble the ingredients that want to be read representationally. And so when I look at this one at the far, the but one like that, it immediately puts me in mind of a very late 50s, early 60s painting of Frank Auerbach, the English painter.
Yeah.
And so I always want to say, if I look at it long enough, I'll find the brow, I'll find the eyes, and I'll find the jut of the jaw. But in fact, as long as I look at it, I actually won't find those things because the intentionality of finding those things is not there. But nonetheless, he's got a sensibility, ingredients, and methodology that's not so different from a painting that would be about a quarter of the size, but similar abrasive colors and thick strokes and built up impasto that you find in a painting that becomes like 60% from Giacometti, 10% from Takumi, and 30% from somewhere else. That that you can see actually. So that would therefore make it more pictorial and more. Greenberg would say more of a painting, less of a picture. I would say more of a picture, less of a painting. But it's actually that it's got the ingredients of a representation without being a representation. Does that make sense?
I read somewhere that optical fluctuation, he got annoyed with it, and that's why he changed the work. I mean, I was saying to Steve yesterday, the big one in the adjacent room kind of looks like a magic eye when you look at it. It is very illusionist. As far as the time, I agree with Kelty with what you were saying. I mean, first of all, there's just too much. No one uses yellow ochre anymore. I know. You need to get away with it. You get away with it. Like the pink in the spot next to it.
But yeah, I don't.
That's it, and then also I think the full capacity top all over with this kind of painting. You just see it. Like it has to have at least half the canvas kind of nude if you're going to use paint that thick. As far as of the contemporary painting I've seen. I mean, this is the one where he lets all the bottom come out, and it associates it in my mind more with Joe Mitchell, or sort of people who was kind of trying to get away from it.
I think yellow ochre was the first paint. Older than the cave paintings, they found yellow and red ochre in South Africa in like little molding trays that was probably used to paint bodies. I mean, they haven't actually found the paintings for them, but they're the oldest paint.
That's so perfect. That's so perfect. Because when
talk about timeless, you know.
Yeah, when something else I hear in your essay was so before the paintings he did at KARG, the early paintings, he was doing social realist, and he just got fed up, and he went out and found some rocks in Paris, and he brought them back. And so those paintings are paintings of rocks. And it's like, of course he's painting rocks. He's making cave painting walls of rocks with the oldest thing. It seems like, again, it's finding the density of his own human existence.
Another big theme, though, is French painting in the 1950s, 40s and 50s, matière. They were obsessed by that haptic quality of the actual paint, literally and physically embodying a sensibility, and that build-up in impasto is not merely a style, it's an ideology.
Yeah. And I think one aspect of that, which I think is important to understand for Held, is so many people who knew him and met him remarked on the power of his own physical body. Yeah, so that's another angle to it, where part of these paintings, one can see it has been read as a kind of expression of his power of his body, and almost like like you can think of maybe someone like Matthew Barney, if he was making paintings at this time, as an endurance moment, I mean, just to make a strange comparison, but just as an endurance test, let's see if I can push myself to make this kind of heavy painting, and I'm thinking like early Matthew Barney kind of endurance tests.
Yeah, that's certainly a wild call, but that's why not?
I have a question for you, if you don't mind. Just sort of given how much these are indebted or interested in the mark, and the mark as like a material object, and how much later work is not. In fact,
one extreme or the other.
In fact, makes a maquette essentially of a painting and then remakes it so that all the brush strokes are visible, or at least all go the same way. And it's like, which is just the most bizarre way of making a painting I've ever read. Anyway, to go from one extreme to the other, how do you know, as an older artist, how did you feel about this work?
Well, he kept it kind of hidden You know, he rejected it, and then it came out later that he embraced it. So I think, you know, and I think that's the narrative for a lot of artists, where it's like you're moving forward. You, especially when you're changing your style, it's hard to look at the art world did not embrace such jagged kind of change of direction as it seems to at least do now, which we think that it does, but it probably doesn't. You know, so I think that's part of it. Is like later on, it seems to me, I'm looking for people from the foundation to support this.
Yeah, I mean, from what we know of his own development, it would make sense that he would, apart from just the psychological thing that as artists do get older, they're less antagonistic towards their earliest efforts, and they develop a certain nostalgia to it, towards it. But also, it's because of what happens subsequently. Suddenly you have that aha moment. Your own career has a dialectical shift.
Right.
That something that was going on in this early work projected in your trademark breakthrough, the most important work, and then in late work, where you radically break from that middle period. It's like Dustin's late work looking at the early figurative stuff. Or it's like Alex Katz when in the mid-1980s he really starts to turn towards landscape, and those very early collages have a new validity.
Right.
And so I would have thought with Al Held that when he goes into this kind of nutty, over-the-top computer screen looking all openness and complexity, and that the busyness of these early works would begin to make a new sense.
Yeah.
He couldn't have disliked him that much because he brought him back from Paris.
Good point. Well, that's actually my next question is like, you know, he has such clear bodies of work that span several years. I just have more biographical information. But they're so discrete, and they're related and discrete, and I would say the periods after this, by and large, are more related. That this to me is maybe maybe the first and the last of the most anomalous. But with each new, did he always reject the previous body of work, or did he see them more? Did he see that later, like the 60s to the 70s, the leather paintings and the black and white paintings? Did he see those more cohesive, or did he reject? In other words, was he like a constant rejector? Was he constantly serial monogamous, or did he see this as a progression?
Yeah,
in general.
I'm not going to try to like give a qualified answer to that question, but I think there's definitely a through line, you know, and I think even just stylistically, I think that there's to look at the alphabet paintings like after seeing these, it's very apparent kind of where like looking at these and then the taxi cab works and then how it gets to alphabet paintings, it doesn't seem like such a stark change. And I think that was also. I mean, whether or not it's you see a show, you meet a person, that can be that change in style where somebody clicks for you that someone has put together some ideas for you that you hadn't like yet put together and you want to do it in a different way. I think there was some of that going on. I think it also was part of his own personal progression towards, distilling kind of what he wanted to do. And you can see that even in the taxi cab paintings. And then also the opportunity for him to work really large scale. I think also a big moment for his stylistic change was having the opportunity to use a really big studio space.
Yeah.
And presumably the gravitation towards geometrical motifs in we see the summer words in the show, and perhaps more in the chapel, is it being wise after the event, being a Monday morning quarterback to say, there's the alphabet series, or do we have a sense of the 60s held somehow being nurtured in hidden pockets of these paintings?
I definitely do. I mean, I think part of when I went up to the foundation, which is this incredible space in Held's old home and studio, is really being fascinated by kind of the small passages of these paintings, where I feel like it's almost like you zoom in and you can see, it's almost like the way that de Kooning kind of 60s paintings are kind of zoom in, like some of them actually are kind of zoom in pockets of earlier, more complex canvases. And I think that you can see it in these paintings. I was really fascinated by a kind of small details that could become almost like alphabet paintings in themselves. And I'm not alone in seeing this, but there's like moments in these paintings which could be an entire alphabet painting, I think. Yeah.
Look at the inner sanctum room. The stroke becomes shape.
Yeah, totally.
It still has rough edges and stringy parts.
Yeah.
It's like when there were the stringy parts, it seems he had to knife them. That's another thing about that. I mean, I feel like no one uses a palette knife. There's a lot of troweling is okay, palette knife. You get the Adrian Denny type of criticism.
Again, it's very, I mean, I'm sure I can think of plenty of well, Hans Hoffman, of course, uses but and of the canonical habits, it would seem that actually Hoffman is one of the most resonant with these pictures. But it is, on the other hand, in Paris, the knife is give them all else, that it's it goes in with that matière art informel thing, doesn't it? That Gautier, grabbing with the canvas, it's not necessarily a brushing. Yeah. So I think that this is the stage where, I mean, there's obviously been some perfectly nice seepage between contemporary and historic perspectives, which is an arbitrary distinction anyway, but I'd like to steer the conversation now slightly more in terms of abstraction where it is today and what it might do with and make sense of in these paintings. Kelty, I was very struck with your show at Expressionists and Nash. Obviously we don't have slides for Kelty and Natalie's work, but just if you don't know it, take it on trust, look it up. Most people got a phone, I'm sure they would love you to judge their work on the basis of what you can see on the right. But out of curiosity, anybody here see Kelty's exhibition at Expressionists and Nash? Yeah, pretty healthy smattering. And Natalie's show at Karg? Yeah, about the same number, yeah. Okay, so I'm not talking into a vacuum by any sense, but Kelty, in your own works, your own works really put me in mind with the ambition that Matthew describes so well in his essay of this reconciliation of Mondrian and Pollock. Not that those would be the specific variants for it, but a strategy for understanding painting that's armature, grid, structure matters, and freedom and elastic choices within matter.
Right.
Would those be variants that would bring you into some sympathy with that at this point?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, I guess in those formal qualities, the way that I most identify with his work in general would be, I mean, I have a great compositional admiration for his work. It's like the structure, the drawing is so structured and yet dynamic, and the weights and the contrapposto of how things are set up, like and they have like a unity of like visual force and a unity that I always strive for, and yet there's also like complex surprises within his compositions and drawings. So, I mean, there's other ways in which I don't feel really, I like to show how I think I come more from this earlier set of work. I'm more old-fashioned than he is, in that I want my paintings, or I think my paintings reveal the process of the making. Not that you can exactly say this came first and that came second, but I definitely want there to feel like there was someone struggling to make them, and yet maybe they were trying to hide themselves at various points, like making up the index isn't as, sometimes it's very clear, sometimes it's not so clear, but it's not this, I mean, he seems to be one extreme or the other. Those are things I'm interested in. I mean, he is too, but clearly he separates out these philosophies very starkly. And I don't.
Right.
Yeah.
Your work perhaps has more of an archaeology or something.
Exactly, yeah. That's big work. Yeah.
His is more of a
Yeah.
level of in that sense.
I have a question. I think something that you share is will, and I think, a lot of us have that. You have to. I'm wondering though about your kind of asking Matthew with regards to rejections in order to go to the next, because your recent work was a willful shift. And how has that, as now having sort of sharing an affinity with what he perhaps went through, how do you, why did you make a shift in the first place? Why did you make a shift?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess that's one reason why I like making my other paintings that are more colorful. I mean, I hope I will make more of them. I hope to make more of them. It's not like but I sort of felt like my life had changed, the world had changed from my show 3 years ago. Like everything's changed, and like politically and personally, I've gotten married. There's I live in the country sometimes. Trump is horrific. I don't know. I just can't like continue to like make this. I don't know, pretending like it's the same as 10 years ago. So not that there's like some one correlation between this work like is synonymous with marriage and Republican politics or something, but I don't know. I needed something that felt like new and different, and the specifics and there were some things that I felt like had been overlooked, and that was like texture, tactility, or thickness and not thickness. So I started with that, and then it kind of grew. But why does one? I don't know. I mean, yeah. Why does I always actually wonder why we don't change more often? Like, why don't we why are painters so dogged in their pursuit and of singular ideas
for signature style
for years and years? And I get it. It's kind of been one of the big major surprises of being a grown-up artist is how long you can think about one thing for a long time. Like a decade. Like I never ever as a teenager or an art student would have ever thought that I could have concentrated as long as I did. So in other ways, it's like, why don't we just jump from like idea to idea constantly?
Yeah.
That might be more interesting.
It also makes me think about something that's distinct in this period that is just not discussed in the same way, which is space. I mean, I feel like this time everybody talked about painting space, the space in the painting.
Yes.
When was the last time anybody talked about space?
Just think about that a little bit here.
Yeah, I think it's perhaps, I was thinking like maybe our eyes have sunk into our heads because space has become more integrated with the sort of front of our eyeball. In other words, there's a kind of the screen sensibility, which is part of why with your work, feeling the necessity to pull the matter out of the canvas.
Yeah.
It seems really good, strong and direct will response to that.
No, I was thinking about that on my way over here too, because I was a religious reader of Frank Stella's Working Space as an art student, and I've had so many conversations in school about like the space I was trying to create in paintings, and I do feel like I've internalized that logic, but it is when I heard that Held wanted to have like you feel the space in between the painting and the viewer, the image or I don't know if you thought it was the image or the illusion was coming out at you and like operating between. Anyway, that's so not how the dialogue happens anymore. I was thinking,
Yes.
and now it's like it's all about like cultural illusions. Like this makes me think of Blood and Guts, or this makes me think of screen space, and images are just images, like they're locked in, they don't have like, people don't have a vocabulary, at least they don't have a vocabulary for talking about. Now that doesn't mean they don't see it, or just because they can't talk about it, and often when we do talk about it, we sound crazy.
Yeah, but
We do, like sometimes it gets really woo-woo, like really fast, and I'm not really sure the other person is really seeing the same thing you're seeing, and yet you're both like talking about space bending or
when Hell talked about wanting to bridge some gap between him and the viewer with the impasto projecting into the room, that resonated with me as less of an ambition and more of a justification after the event, because it didn't seem plausible as really a strategy, because otherwise he would become a sculptor, or as contemporaries were doing, affix objects to the work. And so it seemed a little, sometimes artists say, I was trying to do X, because they do something, and then they're trying to make sense of what they've done. And sometimes they say it because they actually were trying to do it. I get a strong feeling that it's, in his case, all former. Natali, in relation to your work, it would seem that other moments in Al Hell's career would be more pro-Bosterian than these particular paintings. The alphabet paintings with their demarcations within the sense of divided and united space within. And then even more the illusionistic living work. Do you feel, we were talking in the green room before, this is the second date with Natali and the painter Nicole Wittenberg, who on some panel moderated some years ago. I think it was more like 10 years ago than 6. But there was a moment in that conversation where somebody asked her, panelists felt strong similarity between their work and what the other person's doing, and you said you didn't know, but that's what makes your work interesting to me. Do you feel actually that your interest in these paintings is for the contrast of what they're doing with what you're interested in, or are you seeing some affinities that you want to share with us?
I think when I look at paintings, usually the beginning of looking at a painting, I kind of allow myself to become, I allow, it's like watching somebody get a massage where you feel soothed. I find that my subjectivity is absorbed in it, which is to say that I don't immediately go to thinking about what I can use or how it reflects on me, because I become subject to it, which is part of the pleasure of paintings. And often that happens. Usually I find that when I first look at a painting, I look at what it is before what it says or does
So I can usually start on the inside of the matter and move out. I often miss what an image is until much later. So that's an initial response. Of course, the alphabet things, I say of course because there are some, I think the apparent literal relationship with the paintings I've done recently and the alphabet paintings is probably less accurate as a sort of a shared interest. What I was most struck by that show, which was how many years ago? 4, 5, was the scale of color, the big yellow X, which was in the inner sanctum room, and just feeling so absorbed and overwhelmed by lemon yellow. And that's what stuck with me. I think, I mean, there are some really explicit differences which have to do with, I guess you would call it illusion, although I don't really think of it as illusion like the way that it's in my paintings where it tries to pretend what it is all the time. I think what's exciting to me about these paintings are unembarrassed, unabashed matter. I mean, it actually got me thinking about what is, I mean, a lot of people say, oh, he's very gusto, you know, very masculine. And the male, female, masculine, feminine is a big subject right now. And so, I mean, personally, it's not how I think. However, it did make me think, well, what makes something supposedly male or masculine, or like, why is gusto necessarily a masculine trait? And particularly if you looked at painting globally, but particularly European painting, you're mostly looking at men's work anyway, so how could you even make that judgment? So that's something I thought, which maybe is part of what I involve myself in thinking about his work. But my work is a way of subverting so-called drama as so-called masculine characteristic, or something like that.
That's in a way why I feel that the other periods have held with their held back, or their slow to restrained aloofness, calculation, and therefore, less animal and more angelic kind of quality of a priori image. That's what I feel resonates most with your work. Certainly not the way it had been in the 1950s, a powerhouse of a certain paradigm shifting, the engine of a paradigm shifting aspect of the contemporary. But abstract painting, there are so many good abstract painters around doing this interesting work that it means that when we have an unknown aspect of a master's work presented to us, it's a bit like if you have a Cadillac that you never drove and you kept it in the garage and you pull it out. It's a vintage car and yet it's got a pristine engine in it. So these are, I'm a big believer in work is as old as when it's received, not when it's made. For me, the Lascaux cave paintings really are works of the 1940s and 50s because that's when they're seen, that's when they enter the orbit. Who cares where they came from? So, we've sort of teased out this question already, but clearly Al Hell is not a zombie formist. But my goodness. But should they feel like they're resonating in some way? And by the way, I just how Joan Snyder in that one.
Yeah, I mean, he's hugely influential on Chris Martin, and I feel a lot of Joe Bradley in this room.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
individual influence is a good place to start, but I wonder also if
you want to go big.
I want you to do the work. But
I I mean, I kind of feel like the golden moment of abstraction, I mean, it was like about 10 years ago, and it flittered into zombie formalism, and now figurative painting is more popular, which is great. And but it's not like there's plenty of space for us all to participate. It's not so I don't have I don't feel beaten over the head with too many an overabundance of abstraction the way I did a few years ago.
Right.
And so, which is actually quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I have any grand theories. I'm just plodding along to try to figure out how to keep going on, it is surprising how resonant it is, or how much it seems to matter to people. That doesn't seem to go away.
And by the way,
Which is quite shocking. I mean, really, it's shocking. I thought when I started doing this, it would be like, I don't know, like a horse jockey or something, like something that really no one cares about. Something really anomalous that only, and I guess it is similar, but but it does seem to resonate to other things, and it seems to have lots of metaphors and full of illusions for people to jump off of and to go to their own places. So it seems to endure.
Yes. And it can be held from any period. It doesn't have to be in these accounts. Just held in general. How do we feel this will be figured in?
Okay, I didn't misunderstand the question. I'm sorry.
Discourse. No, in fact, I intended to ask that question, and actually, with the Cadillac analogy, asked if they did.
He breaks things down into elements. So here we have the brush stroke paint that he made himself, and it's very visceral and then he goes into alphabet, so he's talking about the bones of the language. And also when you think about color as abstraction, color as a subject matter isn't discussed, but if you look at the planets or the stars, you can tell how old it is from the color it is. So that's it's not as the colors that have meaning specific things and also meaning more broadly. So I think part of why I do think he's very influential, and maybe less these because they haven't really been seen, influential of Celtic name, but I'm sure plenty of other people, because the work is generous in that way. It lays it out.
Yeah, he's very. I think Kelty hit a nail on the head very early in this discussion by talking about the American infatuation with the sound. Mm-hmm. And I think actually that held, even in this most visceral, most getting your hands dirty, painterly moment of his early career, what we see is the beginnings of what becomes a very semiotic kind of approach, whether in the alphabet paintings or in the late screensaver kind of images. And I think that that's what, to my mind, would make him very much relevant to this contemporary moment. Matthew, you were very illuminating on affinities with unexpected places, 50s, 80s. Let's test your acumen and take you right up to 2018.
Yeah, and I think, I talk about an essay about certain painters that resonated for me. Actually, one of them might be Jean-Baptiste Bernardet, somewhere here. Yes, he's right here. I'm going to embarrass him. But I think there's, I was working on a piece for a while on Talbot Braque and thinking about kind of contemporary artists and sort of like gesture making. And I thought my initial hypothesis was that I would find a lot of artists that I felt like really resonated with this idea of gesture. And I felt, as I went on, that actually I found a lot less than I thought that I would. And I think that sort of made me focus on this idea of like, is a gesture and gesture making still like super taboo? And I think it is. Like no one wants to make a gesture because it's very kind of dated. But I wonder, it's always you think you're sort of part of this, like you have this historical construct and you come to everything as you get old. I mean, for myself, I come come to everything as I get older with all this kind of load on my back about how I perceive things. And I'm very curious how younger artists will come into the show who don't have any kind of preconceived association with gesture making and loaded paint and all these things that bring to mind the history of European painting, American painting, and what they might do with it. And that's what's so exciting about gallery exhibitions, is that anyone can come in and see the show, and I'm very curious kind of what that resonance will be.
Yeah, in fact, the more interesting question, the one that cannot be answered, is not who on the current scene right now does this have an affinity with, but rather the raison d'etre of historically researched shows in the contemporary gallery is exactly what Matt is describing. The art student who's pretty much sick of everything that's on offer right now, who comes in and says yes. And I think if you go to the Soutine show in the Jewish Museum and then come afterwards to this, we might see some more angst and mud in the paintings to come the next wave in a few years' time. Well, we do have the possibility at home to bring in our audience, and this is a moment where I'd love to be able to do that. I don't know what the technology is. Is there a mic that's going to go around? There is indeed a mic that's going to go around. Excuse me. So, thank you very much, the panelists, for your contributions so far. And one of my quirks as a moderator is I'm one of those weird people who prefers comments to questions. So you don't have to you don't have to make a speech and then work out in the last moment how to put a question mark at the end of it. The panelists have put in sterling work. If you are definitely have a question from any of your orders, that's fine. But I will not come down on you like a ton of bricks if actually we just want to say something. So, but do, if you don't mind, make it succinct. Wonderful, I can see a hand already. I have to know that's when you go.
I was thinking also, I know he was in France, but I know he was also influenced by Italy, and I was thinking of the Art Deco, and I was thinking of Fontana and Maccarelli, and also maybe even the Spanish painter Tiapes, and the whole concept too about war, the excavation of the earth, the upheaval of the earth after a war, and the fact that materials were hard to get, and so whatever you could find could be used. So there was very much the physical sense of creating something out of this destruction that existed. And I also want to mention that in a very different context, Kiefer is involved in it, but that has the other elements, but he certainly almost picks up material itself and just pastes it practically onto the surface. So maybe some of you have some thoughts about the Italian influence and maybe even Kiefer in terms of his use of thick matter.
Yes, Kiefer and also Bartlett, actually, makes sense in relation to that. A very good point, Wendy, thanks very much. And of course, extrapolating from what you're saying, Alberto Burri would be a natural affinity with that kind of heavy, dark palette. More? Anyone learning to talk about drawings? We didn't. I think we're okay. I think that's been splendid. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. You can leave your ideas, reviews, comments, critiques, suggestions, talking points. Below, you can like this and subscribe. Please share. And please help me with this, folks. We do our tribute here, and we thank you, Kate. Whoa! Thank you, thank you.